What's good, everybody? It's Robo back with another video, and today I've got my college football week 11 picks. We've got 50 FBS games this week, and I'm going over every single one of them as usual. We've got some absolutely massive matchups this week, but before I get into everything, let me go ahead and recap the week 10 results. Week 10 was a wild one picks-wise. I had a pretty tough week picking winners, and against the spread, I was pretty even overall after a disaster late-night slate for me. But I had 3 perfect score picks, while a last-second Oregon touchdown ruined a 4th. And heading into week 11, we're still in the same spot as last week, still up a decent amount on the year. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this week's picks and get started in order of kickoff time as usual. Maction is back with Bowling Green and Central Michigan kicking off week 11 from Mount Pleasant. Last time out, these two teams went opposite directions. Bowling Green blowing out Toledo on the road, and Central taking a beating from Miami, Ohio. For this one, Bowling Green has a clear defensive advantage, but they are giving up some yards on the ground, which is what Central really likes to do as an offense. I do think there's a decently large gap between these two teams on paper, but the MAC's been super tough to predict this season. But Bowling Green is still alive, fighting for a MAC championship, and Central is on a freshman third-string quarterback and has a ton of injuries ramping up. I think the Falcons show up on the road and play well enough to win convincingly. Give me the Falcons 34-17. Game 2 is Miami, Ohio at Ball State. Brett Gabbert got a little banged up last week, but returned to that game, and I haven't heard any news on his status being in doubt for this one. Ball State's coming off a big upset win at home over Northern Illinois, but that Northern Illinois team just looks much worse than expected after they beat Notre Dame early this season. I do think it just adds to the narrative how random this conference has been all year, but with these two teams, I think Miami, Ohio has been incredibly impressive lately. A 3-game win streak, including 2 blowouts and covering in all 3 games. Ball State's defense is still getting up nearly 500 yards a game on the year, and I don't mind riding with a hot hand here, even in a road spot. Along with some poor weather, give me the Red Hawks to stay hot with a 31-14 win over Ball State. Ohio's on the road this week at 0-8 Kent State in a matchup that really shouldn't be too close if things go the way they have all season for these teams. Ohio sits at 3-1 in the MAC with top 5 in both offense and defense in the conference. And obviously, as they sit winless with a ton of ugly losses, Kent State sits dead last in both categories. But the wildest stat to me is the 540 yards per game they're giving up, with over 260 coming on the ground. Even on the road, I think Ohio should have no problems moving the football and scoring basically at will here. Any chance of a cover from Kent State will have to come to their offense or forcing some turnovers. 2 things they haven't really done much at all year. I'm taking Ohio big in this one, 38-17. Western Michigan leads the MAC right now with a perfect 4-0 record. Those wins coming over 4 of the worst teams in the conference though, and this is undoubtedly going to be their toughest test so far. Northern Illinois still ranks towards the top of the conference in both offense and defense despite the struggles, sitting at just 1-3 in conference coming off a bad loss to Ball State. Western's offense ranks number 1 in the MAC and dominates on the ground, so their ability to run the football against this defense is going to be crucial. Like I said, the MAC has been crazy, and I wouldn't be surprised by almost any result of this game. But with Western looking to stay atop the MAC, I like the Broncos to come out a bit hungrier and win this one, 24-20. On to Thursday in the Sun Belt, we've got App State and Coastal Carolina, 2 really poor defensive teams who both sit at 4-4 in the season, but maybe heading in opposite directions. App State winning 2 games in a row now, looking more like the team many expected out of the gate with Joey Aguilar and some strong weapons around him. And Coastal now sporting a 3-game losing streak, including a road loss to 1-7 Troy team last week by double digits. And some poor quarterback play has that situation up in the air right now as well. This should be a pretty solid atmosphere advantage for Coastal Carolina, but I think the amount of issues they're dealing with right now, combined with an App State team starting to feel it, will end up giving the Mountaineers the edge here, 34-30. Next is FAU at East Carolina. East Carolina coming off a huge win at Temple in their first game after firing Mike Houston. As for FAU though, South Florida with a backup quarterback went into FAU and ran all over them. Over 300 yards on the ground and 30 straight unanswered second half points. ECU's getting this one at home, and although they haven't ran the ball too well this season, they're coming off a 230-yard day last week against Temple. Caden Hauser's put together back-to-back great days at quarterback, and I think ECU has more than enough offense in this game to come away with this one by at least a score or more. I'm going to go with a 35-24 final for the Pirates. Friday starts with Cal and Wake Forest, an opposite side of the country ACC battle, as Cal will make the long trip for this one. They've lost to Florida State and Pitt on the road already this year, and will look to avoid an upset this time, coming in as road favorites. Wake's got some juice though, with Backmeyer as one of the more experienced guys in the country and a solid running game to complement him. But it's a defensive matchup that throws a wrench in this one for Wake. Cal comes in as the second best defense in the conference, while Wake ranks dead last, giving up 440 yards a night. Fernando Mendoza absolutely torched Oregon State last time out, and although I think Wake's offense will score enough to keep him in it, I just don't see them getting it done. I've got Cal taking this one on the road close, 31-27. Ethan Garber's been willing UCLA to victory the last 2 weeks. 2 really impressive performances as a leading rusher, as well as dominating through the air. This week they're at home, but up against an elite Iowa defense that's gotten quite a bit of help from the offense lately behind Brennan Sullivan at quarterback, and of course an incredible run game led by Caleb Johnson. Iowa's put up 40 in back-to-back games, and although UCLA's defense has been better, I just don't think they'll be able to slow down this rushing attack nearly enough compared to what Iowa's defense can do to limit Garbers. I like Iowa on the road here, 30-21 to keep it rolling. Rice got EJ Warner back last week and took down Navy at home behind a great day from the defense, shutting down Navy's offense almost completely. While Warner did what he needed to do to keep Rice in a position to score throughout the game, that's 2 great defensive games in a row from Rice now, and that momentum is going to be needed here up against a stellar Memphis offense with their backs against the wall now. An awful late down conversion rate and another rough game defensively allowed UTSA to upset the Tigers last week. The defense has been a real issue for Memphis lately despite a really encouraging start to the year, but despite Warner being back and Rice looking a lot better last week, I still don't think they pose enough of a threat to pull off the upset again here on the road. I like Memphis by 2 scores, 37-24. The final weeknight game of Week 11 is New Mexico at San Diego State, and it should be a fun watch as New Mexico games tend to be thanks to one of the worst defenses in all of college football. Combined with an offense that's second in the Mountain West behind Boise State, last week that defense was maybe at its worst, giving up 49 to Wyoming, who entered last week even worse offensively than the San Diego State team has been. And if we're looking at it from that standpoint, a Wyoming team who San Diego State beat on the road, with that considered, I really don't mind laying 3 points here with the Aztecs at home. I'm expecting a shootout, and that usually does favor a better offense, but a defense this bad can make an exception. Give me San Diego State 37-31. We'll start Saturday off with Ohio State and Purdue at noon. Hudson Card is starting at quarterback for the Boilers again, and he's got some big game experience, obviously. He played decently last week against Northwestern, in my opinion, which gives Purdue probably a bit better chance to score this week as opposed to the Oregon game a few weeks ago where they lost 35-0 with Ryan Brown at the helm. I think after the Penn State win, we could definitely see a hungover Buckeye team this week. Not nearly enough to ever put this game in question, really, but a 38-point spread is super high for a conference matchup. 38 is obviously attainable, but I think Purdue does find some points here with a less locked-in Buckeye defense to keep it within such a high number. But obviously, this one could be over pretty quickly. I'm going to go 45-10 Ohio State. We've potentially got a big one in the ACC with Miami heading out to Georgia Tech. Haynes King's status is obviously massive in this game. Obviously, he's been out, and we haven't heard any real updates, but I'm assuming he'll try to play in a game this large, hoping to give the Yellow Jackets a chance at an upset. Georgia Tech has looked very competitive with him at quarterback, but have really missed him lately, getting blown out by Notre Dame and Virginia Tech. And if he isn't able to go on this one either, I don't see them having much of a chance at all, and the spread probably inflates quite a bit. But as it currently stands, I do like getting a Haynes King-led Tech team at home as double-digit dogs to a team who's been in some closer games this season. But I do like Miami to prevail in the end regardless, 38-28. Texas hosts Florida this week with Aiden Warner as a likely starting quarterback for the Gators after a disastrous day in Athens last week up against the Georgia defense. After Lagway went down, Florida went completely limp offensively and lost control of that game. And this week may be no different in Texas, assuming Lagway is out again. I would expect the Gators to be pretty reliant on the run game and hope the defense can force some stops to keep them in this one as long as possible. But against an offense as talented as the Longhorns are, and off a bye week to clean up what went wrong in that Vanderbilt scare, I think Texas is going to roll in this one by basically shutting Florida down offensively. I've got a 34-10 final score for the Horns. Minnesota heads out to Rutgers this week coming off a 4-game winning streak. Ethan Kelly McManus will look for his revenge game as Minnesota went out and clearly upgraded this offseason with Max Brosmer as he headed to Piscataway. But this Rutgers team, who once looked promising, is now sitting on a 4-game losing streak, looking rough on both sides of the ball. Minnesota just beat a rock-solid Illinois team on the road. One I think is definitely playing better football than this Rutgers team. So with the bye week coming next week for the Gophers, I like Minnesota to continue their run thanks to another great defensive game, 27-17. McCord looked much better last week against Virginia Tech, albeit without Drones and Tootin playing, but they got the upset win and now head on the road to take on an easier team in Boston College, but another one that should be pretty tough as road games usually are. This Cuse defense is not really stopping anyone right now, and Castellanos may give them some fits, but as an offense, Boston College just hasn't looked great for most of the season, and last time out against Louisville, that lead was built pretty heavily with turnovers, and they still found a way to lose that one. I think Cuse is a better team in this matchup, so if they get a few stops and avoid a turnover problem again, I think Syracuse can steal a road victory as an underdog again, 30-27. Cincinnati takes on West Virginia this week after the bye week, looking to put the Colorado loss behind them, and they'll likely be seeing Nico Marchiol as quarterback for the Mountaineers as he had a pretty strong performance last time out at Arizona, and Garrett Green is listed as doubtful for this one. But that Arizona win doesn't really mean much for West Virginia here, seeing how badly UCF beat them last week right after. I still like what I've seen out of Cincinnati this year, especially offensively. Sorsby and Kiner have been really impressive outside of the Colorado game, and West Virginia is missing enough defensively in this game for the two defenses to be closer to a wash in my opinion. I'm rolling with the better offense playing at home in Cincinnati here by a touchdown, 31-24. What a letdown Texas State has been this season, coming in with some real hype as one of the best Group of 5 teams in the country, to now sitting 4-4 including 2 losses in the Sun Belt, and now Jordan McLeod's status is unknown as he left last week's game with an injury. RJ Martinez played some decent football in his relief though against a strong Louisiana defense, but obviously fell short in that one. This week they'll be on the road at UL Monroe, and with the way that team's played this season defensively, I think McLeod's going to be needed here to try and avoid an upset. They hung around with Marshall last week on the road and are 4-0 at home on the season so far. Bryant Vincent has really turned this program around this year, and I think ULM hangs around again, but I do like Texas State to survive as long as McLeod plays. 28-24. Navy's officially on a bit of a fraud watch now after getting obliterated by Notre Dame, followed up by a road loss by 2 scores to a pretty below average Rice team. The offensive rhythm seems to have been figured out a bit, and the defense has really struggled these past 2 weeks, as well as here and there throughout the whole year. This week, though, they're on the road again, taking on a South Florida team who just exploded in the second half to dominate FAU on the road with a huge day on the ground. Probably still no Byron Brown, but Bryce Archie looked good last week, and I doubt this Navy defense will have enough to shut down South Florida's offense regardless. I like USF to continue the Navy slide to 3 games now, with a 30-28 win for the Bulls as home dogs. On to another disappointing team, Liberty, who also had some hopes as one of the better Power 5 teams in the country, but hasn't looked the part whatsoever. Last week continuing that as they fell at home to Jacksonville State by 10, unable to find any rhythm in the passing game, and giving up well over 350 yards on the ground in total. Jacksonville State has an incredible run game though, and this week's matchup should be much easier with Middle Tennessee, but it is on the road, and we've seen this Liberty team fall to Kennesaw State just a few weeks ago. This team sits around the same realm as Kennesaw does towards the bottom of the entire FBS. I am not really a huge fan of Liberty, especially as of late, but I do think they have significantly better talent than Middle Tennessee and should be eager to end this 2-game skid here. I'm taking the Flames here by 2 scores, 34-20. Bowl eligible UConn hits the road this week to take on 2-6 UAB, but maybe a hot UAB team coming in this one off a 59-point throttling of Tulsa last week. Jalen Kitna got the nod again with Jacob Zeno out and threw for over 400 yards in the day, finally looking comfortable running that offense and getting UAB back on track to what many expect them to look like this season. Obviously it hasn't gone to plan, but coming off that win, maybe there was some hope for a stretch run late. UConn has already hit the 6-win mark and doesn't have much to play for right now, but I have to say this team looks really solid running the football. I think they'll be able to control this game when they need to stay in this lead unless Kitna's on an absolute heater again. I like UConn to end UAB's bowl hopes this week, but I think there's some real upset smoke here still. I'll go 35-31 Huskies. Next is Marshall at Southern Miss. Southern Miss comes into this one 1-7, including 6 straight losses, and most recently a 17-point loss on the road at James Madison. The defense did quite a decent job in that game, limiting a much more talented James Madison team to a really rough day to keep that one closer than it could have been. And this week they've got a bit better of an opportunity taking on a Marshall team who's 5-3, but not as good as that JMU team. Just last week they beat Louisiana Monroe by 5 at home, and all the 3 losses have come on the road this year, albeit 2 of them against Ohio State and Virginia Tech. I don't think Southern Miss becomes loss number 4 here, but I could see a similar result as the JMU game. If Marshall isn't sharp on late downs, this one could be closer than they hope. I'm going to take Marshall though, 35-23. On to maybe the game of the week, Georgia at Ole Miss, a game that could really shake up the top of the SEC standings. Georgia has genuinely looked very beatable basically all season long, besides that incredible Texas performance, and that game weighs pretty heavy, as without it, it'd be pretty easy to take Ole Miss here at home. The Rebels have looked so good offensively outside the Kentucky loss, and even the LSU game, I thought they performed well enough to escape that one victorious. This atmosphere should be electric and help them out for sure, but big game Georgia can be something else. Carson Beck has been really up and down this season though, and has thrown 11 interceptions at this point. If that continues this week, I really do like Ole Miss's chances with how well the offense is playing. I'm going to go out on that limb and say it does, as Georgia takes their second loss of the year in the SEC, and Ole Miss shakes up the standings 30-27. Over to the Big Ten is Michigan at Indiana. Indiana now at 9-0 on the season, looking to lock up some playoff hopes with just Ohio State and Purdue remaining after this one. But Michigan could be a tough matchup with a great defense and an improving but still well below average offense. Davis Warren's put together 2 solid performances in a row now and looked pretty strong as a passer against Oregon, but still a ton to clean up, especially with his pocket presence. And Indiana on the road may prove to be just as hard a task for him. Michigan's been pretty bad on the road this season, and now with Rourke back, the Hoosiers are absolutely feeling it. I expect them to be fully ready for this game, knowing it's still Michigan that they're playing, and as they've done all year, find a way to dominate and roll on. I like the Hoosiers 31-14. Kansas takes on Iowa State this week with a much different tone now than a few weeks ago, with the Cyclones barely avoiding an upset from UCF, just to then be upset the very next week by Texas Tech. And Kansas coming out of a bye week having played their best football as of late despite a 2-6 record. Their backs are fully against the wall now, and I still really like the way they played in that Kansas State game on the road. Iowa State's looking real beatable right now, and Kansas still has the playmakers and stars to be able to pull off an upset like this. And as long as they come out hungry, I think they'll do just that and take down Iowa State again in Arrowhead, 27-24. Bryson Daly was ruled out before kickoff last week, which would completely ruin an Army cover against Air Force, although they did come close still. But the simple truth is that Air Force team is abysmal this season, and North Texas statistically has one of the best offenses in the American, and could have given Army some real trouble this week. Daly's injury is still relevant, but we've gotten a little updates on his health besides that he's questionable to probable. If he's in, I do feel good about Army being able to survive a game like this on the road, but North Texas should score regardless, so if he's out or limited as a runner at all, I really think North Texas can hang around and maybe pull off the upset. Army can run all over them still because of how bad the defense has been, But we saw last week how important Daly is to this offense. We'll see how he can go here if he plays, but for now, I'll take Army by a tight margin, 31-28. Clemson's playoff hopes took a huge hit last week, falling at home to Louisville in pretty shocking fashion considering how well the Tigers were playing at that point. But now with 2 losses, another one would completely eliminate their hopes of getting in, and this week could be that week as they're on the road at Virginia Tech. The Hokies badly missed Drones and Tootin last week, falling to Syracuse in overtime in the Dome, and any chance they have of winning this week is going to boil down to them being healthy enough to play here, and it does seem like that will be the case. I think Virginia Tech gives Clemson a serious run for their money again, but the Tigers play a much better game this week with their backs against the wall now, and survive a big test on the road close, 28-24. Duke at NC State's a real tough one again here. Obviously, I've said in the past, I think Duke's been pretty overrated this year in terms of record versus performance, but they really hung in there with Miami for quite a bit until some late momentum and turnovers happened. But this NC State team seems to finally be hitting their stride as they destroyed Stanford last week, but the defense was still an issue again, giving up a ton to a bad Stanford offense. I think Duke has a real chance in this game as Malik Murphy can play clean this week. Despite the solid 2 weeks now, I'm still not buying the NC State with how they've looked as a whole. Duke's gotten takeaway after takeaway all season long, so it depends on which NC State offense shows up. But if Duke's defense plays how they can, I'm going to rock with Duke on the road, 27-23. Oregon State and San Jose State is a tough one. It's been an up and down year for the Spartans, and for Oregon State, it's been a rough month, dropping 3 straight with some rough games. The Beavers are getting some help though as their number 1 corner to be back, but the quarterback spot's up in the air after another disaster game with Cal. My guess would be Ben Goldbranson, who I thought would start heading into the year, but hasn't seen any action until last week where he scored the lone touchdown. But regardless, this team probably relies on the run game. San Jose State doesn't defend the run too well, and as an offense is pretty pass heavy despite a ton of quarterback struggles and it being the strength of the Beaver defense. That could be what decides this game. Oregon State is in desperation mode as well, so with a new quarterback under center maybe giving some new life to the offense, I'm taking the Beavers at home to handle it, 30-24. James Madison takes on a sinking Georgia State team now on a 5-game losing streak, and although they've been fairly competitive, this stretch has been pretty rough for them defensively, giving up over 30 points in all but one. And this week's game at James Madison is tougher than any of their last 5 losses. With bowl hopes basically shattered, the will of this team is going to be tested this week. For this matchup, the run game is going to be important for James Madison. It's an area they've looked great in almost all year, and a major weakness of Georgia State's defense, giving up over 200 yards on the ground a week. The Panthers have been able to score at some points themselves, but again, this is also the best defense they've seen lately too. I think this matchup plays right into James Madison's favor, especially rested off the bye week. I like the Dukes to roll this week, 41-20. The Buffs are off a bye week after taking care of a solid Cincinnati team, and now it's clear they have a clear path to the playoffs this season. But with a real test coming this week on the road at Texas Tech, the Red Raiders just beat Iowa State last week on the road, which did come as a bit of a shock as Tech had some rough games lately, especially defensively. If the Raiders play the way they did last week, Colorado could be in some trouble. But as for how these teams have looked the rest of the year, I'd say Colorado seems pretty locked in with their goals in front of them. This could be a close game down to the wire if Texas Tech can match Shitter's production. But at this point, even on the road, I do like the Buffs to stay alive in the playoff race and in the Big 12 as well, avoiding turnovers and taking advantage of a weaker defense, 38-31. We've got a lock for worst matchup of the week here with 2 one-win teams facing off. It's Kennesaw State and UTEP. For UTEP, the quarterback situation is a little iffy with Locklear recovering from a concussion on a dirty hit last week. But they've gotten third-string JP Pickles more than enough snaps to be ready enough to start this one if he has to. And Kennesaw has had their fair share of poor quarterback play as well. As of now, Davis Bryson's their starter, and he's got a 3-7 touchdown to interception ratio on the season, as well as just 900 yards across 7 games. Both these teams are going to be pretty reliant on running the football, I would guess. And as opponents match up really similarly in both run defense and rush offense. UTEP has a slight edge though. For a game pick, I got to go with UTEP close at home. I think it'll be lower scoring though, so I'm going to go 24-17 final. Tulane is back home taking on 2-6 Temple this week, and what should be another easy win for the Green Wave. They've been really dominant lately outside of the North Texas game in which they still came out on top of, and still sit undefeated in conference play alongside Army. Not only has Mensa and Hughes dominated offensively, but the Tulane defense needs some credit, allowing just 3 points last week to an okay Charlotte offense. Looking at these teams coming from a recent standpoint, Temple's look slightly improved, but is coming off a disastrous blowout loss to East Carolina, giving up 56 points on the day. This Tulane team is obviously much better than the Pirates, and I can see this game getting out of hand pretty early. It's the worst offense in the conference, up against one of the best on both sides of the football. I'm rocking with Tulane big again, 45-14. South Carolina picked up a massive win last week at home over Texas A&M, more proof of how tough winning on the road in the SEC can be. They looked really sharp last week against Lenora Sellers and Rocket Sanders, who really controlled that game from the Gamecocks. And with that result, we could obviously see a slight hangover effect having to turn around and take on a good Vanderbilt team on the road here. As we've seen, this team is playing really well, taking down Auburn on the road last week and locking in bowl eligibility. Even though a major goal has been reached, I still fully expect them to show up and come play to this one. They've been at the bottom of the SEC for so long and shouldn't be taken this season for granted. Diego Pavia has been a man on a mission, and getting them as home dogs in the spot just seems well worth taking to me. Of course, it could go either way, as South Carolina is arguably a more talented team, but give me Vandy at home again, 24-21. Rich Rod and Jacksonville State are up. On the road this week at Louisiana Tech, I have to give some credit to the Bulldogs lately. The defense has been great, giving up just 19 points across their last 2 games. But I have to say, there's a clear difference in opponent here. Sam Houston without Hunter Watson and a one-win UTEP team just don't compare to Jacksonville State. Their run game has been so elite, especially as of late. Every week now they're putting up huge numbers, both scoring and yardage-wise. This week should be no different, even up against a more stout defense. I just don't fully buy the recent play from Louisiana Tech. Even though this is on the road, I see another big day from Trey Stewart and Tyler Huff. I got Jacksonville State taking this one, 38-23. On to another Sun Belt matchup. Louisiana hosts Arkansas State. Arkansas State sits at 5-3 and has been solid in conference play so far, but has also faced the 2 worst teams in the conference the last 2 weeks, and now hits the road to take on the best in Louisiana. At 7-1 in the year, the lone loss comes by 1 possession to a rock-solid Tulane team, and they've been handling business both at home and on the road this season, even against some solid offenses in Texas State and App State. I think there's a good chance this team can run the table in the Sun Belt and finish the year 11-1. And although the Red Wolves can score some points, Louisiana has been by far the best pass defense in the conference and the number 1 defense overall as well. I really don't think this game should be too close for the Raging Cajuns this week. I'm taking them by 3 scores, 41-20. On to Western Kentucky at New Mexico State. We've seen some wild results in the Conference USA this season. New Mexico State's looked a lot better at home than on the road. The issue this season's been with their defense, though, getting shredded week in and week out on the ground, and last week giving up 300 receiving yards to 1 player. Western Kentucky has one of the better passing offenses in the conference and can really light you up throughout the air, but defensively has not been overly stout themselves, giving up a good chunk of yards this season despite by far the easiest schedule in the conference. This is their 5th conference game and their 4th against a bottom feeder with Middle Tennessee, UTEP, and Kennesaw State already. And even in that Sam Houston game, they knocked out Hunter Watson early. I expect the Hilltoppers to win this game on the road, but 18.5 is just a little too much for me. I'll go 34-17 Western Kentucky. Oregon's got a clear shot at an undefeated regular season now after taking care of Michigan on the road last week. It was maybe the best Michigan's looked all season, honestly, but Oregon still was in firm control almost the entire way. Winning in the Big House is always going to be tough no matter the season the Wolverines are having, and I think we may be seeing Oregon start to separate themselves from the rest of college football right now. This week they've got a layup at home with Maryland coming in, and to keep it simple, this team just lost to Minnesota 2 weeks ago by the same margin as this spread. Oregon can really light up the scoreboard when they want to, and I don't have much of a problem laying 4 scores here. Maryland's been pretty up and down throughout the year, but I just don't see them competing here unless Oregon's hit with a nasty hangover. I like the Ducks big, 42-13. Over to the SEC with Tennessee taking on Mississippi State. It was a nice break from SEC play for the Bulldogs this week as they finally got to taste a win as they beat down UMass. And although it was still a slight struggle defensively, I thought the offense played pretty well. This week they'll likely head back to their losing ways though, as they're just no match for Tennessee really. The Vols have really struggled to both teams out this season besides early on, but they've won 3 straight regardless with Florida, Bama, and Kentucky, and Mississippi State should be a lot easier than those 3 were. Seeing as the offense has kind of struggled outside of Dylan Sampson though, I don't really know if they'll be able to cover a full 24 points here. If Mississippi State can put some points on the board, it's tough to say they'll do so I'm going to take the Vols to win big, but not cover, 38-17. Arizona State hosts UCF this week, but it sounds likely they'll have to do it without Cam Skattebo, which is absolutely huge for UCF as he's been unbelievable this season as almost the entire offense for the Sun Devils. UCF's coming off an electric win over Arizona, putting up 56 on the Cats. RJ Harvey's been unstoppable, and Dylan Risk looked fantastic in his first start. He was good against BYU in limited action as well, so this would be a big week to see if he's for real or not for this offense. Both Arizona State already bowl eligible and missing their superstar, and UCF needing this game badly to potentially reach bowl eligibility. I like a red-hot UCF offense to come to Arizona and steal the win behind another big day from RJ Harvey, 31-28. Oklahoma State heads into this week's matchup with TCU on a 6-game skid now, all 6 in conference, and just seemingly getting worse by the week. The defense is getting shredded both on the ground and through the air, last week giving up 300 yards to Sam Leavitt and over 200 rushing yards to the Devils as well. Ollie Gordon's barely getting touches, and even he's not able to do much with the ball this season. There's not much to say about this team right now other than it seems like they've almost quit. TCU comes in with a really strong passing attack, and I just don't see Oklahoma State being able to stop it at all. One thing going for Oklahoma State, though, is just how bad TCU's been against the run. We might finally see this offense get some easy drives to stay in the ball game, but there really is no reason to not take TCU to win this game at home here, even with how they've looked themselves lately. I like TCU to take this one by 10, 38-28. Florida State's just been an utter embarrassment at this point, and it's going to get even worse this week as they'll take on top 10 Notre Dame on the road this week. Last week, North Carolina absolutely throttled the Noles in their own building with an unstoppable performance from Amarian Hampton. Notre Dame has been absolutely dominant lately, beating teams that are simply better than FSU by more than this spread sits at, and they should want to win this one in style to leave an impression on the playoff committee. A closer win isn't going to do them any favors by any means with how the Noles will play this season, so I like the Irish to hand Florida State its biggest loss of the year, 41-10. Alabama LSU is another massive game in the SEC this week. Both teams badly need this one to stay alive in the playoff hunt. Brian Kelly's history in big games definitely makes this one tough to pick. He loses these matchups pretty often, but LSU does have a solid home win this season over Ole Miss, and the atmosphere should be absolutely electric. They'll need Nussmeier to be on his game and not perform the way he did against Texas A&M. Bama's strength this year has been the pass defense, and I think Alabama comes out looking better than they did in their rough stretch. But in this atmosphere and the way the SEC's gone to the point this season, I'm leaning towards LSU being able to survive another close game against a great opponent and getting it done close, 31-27. Oklahoma at Missouri is another really tough game in the SEC to pick this week, mostly due to the situation at quarterback for Missouri. Brady Cook missed last game with an injury, and the offense was completely demolished by Alabama. Cook's status for this game is still unknown. Any chance they have this game is going to be with him, in my opinion. Drew Pine has been flat out awful both against Auburn and Alabama, and I actually think Oklahoma has a legit chance to win this game on the road, even if Cook plays. Jackson Arnold looks a bit better than before, and prior to the main beatdown, they compete with Ole Miss on the road, who's a subjectively better team than Missouri this season. The main tune-up could have definitely helped put the Sooners in a rhythm for this game, and there's a good chance they get some of those receivers back for this week. So I'm taking OU regardless on the road, but especially if it's Pine again, 24-20. Penn State looks to bounce back this week, taking on Washington from Happy Valley after falling short to Ohio State yet again. I think it's pretty clear James Franklin and Penn State are just not built for the big game, period. This team definitely lacks weapons outside of the backs and Tyler Warren. Drew Aller has basically no help at all last week despite toughing out an injury. But lucky for Penn State this week, this is not really a big game for them. It is at night, but Washington has some serious matchup disadvantages in this game. It'll be important to see how Penn State responds from the loss, but looking at their matchup, they're just a better team across the board no matter how overrated you believe Penn State is. Washington does not look good on the road this season at all, dropping all three to this point. I don't see that changing this week. Give me Penn State by over 2 scores, 31-13. Boise State takes on Nevada this week in what should be another easy win for the Broncos. Teams have been completely selling out on Ashton Genty right now, loading up the box, and he's still putting up great numbers, even while Boise counters by letting Maddox Madsen throw all over single coverage left and right. Boise's going to keep on rolling no matter the opponent until someone changes their stance on defensive philosophy, and even then, Ashton Genty probably just begins to dominate again. Nevada's lost 3 in a row now and lost by 3 scores last week despite substantially outgaining Colorado State with Brandon Lewis back. But I do think they should show up better given that they're all against a Boise State team. This one just won't be close again in my opinion. I've got Boise by 3 scores, 45-24. Last week was a rough one for Eli Holstein and Pitt, running into a wall with SMU just wiping the floor with them. Outside of the Duke game, SMU's been absolutely incredible lately, so I'm not too worried about this Pitt team just yet. It's their first loss of the year on the road against an elite opponent. This week's a big one, though, to see how they respond getting a decent Virginia team at home here. Virginia's 4-4 and has lost 3 straight, but competed with both Louisville and Clemson prior to getting spanked by North Carolina. They also had a bye week last week to kind of rekindle what was working for them early on, but honestly, I think Pitt's advantage here lies with their offense getting to play a much lesser defense this week. Virginia's given up the 3rd most yards in the ACC this season, and a lot of it comes through the air. I think Holstein bounces back this week in the night game and takes down Virginia 34-23. UNLV heads out to Hawaii this week, taking on a team playing a lot like how I thought they would early on this season, coming off back-to-back wins blowing out Nevada and then upsetting Fresno State. This is going to be a much tougher week though, as UNLV is a very good team and rested off a bye week after the loss to Boise. How they come out is probably going to determine their ability to cover in this game, and I think they're more than talented enough to be able to handle this Hawaii team. But having to travel that far, on top of the fact that Hawaii sits atop the Mountain West defensively right now, while the offense is finally starting to click, definitely makes it tougher. UNLV's defense has been up and down this year, but it's given up a ton of points to some pretty average teams on the road like Oregon State and Utah State. And I wouldn't be shocked to see Hawaii hanging around for a while in this one. I'm going to go with UNLV to win it though, 35-24. Fresno State will look to rebound this week after a terrible performance last week against Hawaii, choking a lead late in their own building. Just a terrible game all around from Fresno State with absolutely zero run game and a rough defensive collapse. This week's a big chance to put that behind them though, as despite hanging with the Army last week, this Air Force team's been legitimately awful. And the only reason that game was even close was because of Bryson Daly's injury forcing the backup to make the start. And even so, Army handled them pretty easily still. This team just has zero offensive presence outside the New Mexico game, and that's probably the worst defense in the entire country. I think Fresno gets refocused for this one and takes care of business this time against a far inferior opponent, 31-14. On to some late night Big 12 action. Number 9 BYU heads out to Utah, who's dealing with a quarterback battle this week. Isaac Wilson lost a job after a terrible game at Houston, and despite an even rougher game from him in that one, Brandon Rose will compete with Isaac to start this matchup. I think regardless of who wins the job, we'll see both guys unless one somehow is able to find success against a great BYU defense. The Cougars are still undefeated now at 8-0 after the bye, and Utah sits on a 4-game losing streak with absolutely pitiful offensive play. I don't see how they'll be able to change that enough against this BYU team to come away with a win here. I gotta go with BYU to get it done and stay undefeated, 27-17. The final game of the week is top 25 Washington State taking on Utah State. It's the highest point total of the week, and for good reason, as Utah State ranks among the absolute worst defense in the entire country this season. If Washington State isn't too far behind, giving up well over 400 yards a week themselves. Both these offenses are lighting it up as well, though, but more so Washington State, averaging nearly 40 points a game with an electric offense led by John Mateer. As usual with these teams, we should see a ton of offense both ways, but I have a lot more faith in Washington State's defense getting consistent stops than I ever would with Utah State this season. The defense has done a better job the past few weeks, and I think that could continue here back at home. Give me Wazoo big, 45-21. That's it for my Week 11 picks. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, as well as your upset predictions and which games you're most excited to watch this week. As always, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.